All right, now I'm joined by Annie Frisbie, fresh off of a shiny new personal best, 2:23:21, eighth place at the Boston Marathon, second American. You gave yourself, I think, a whole week. You just told me before we started recording, no running, lots of walking, into nature in Bellingham, Washington. And so when you're out there, like, how have the feelings been processed for this performance?
Yeah, it was great to have a trip planned immediately after. I was out there visiting my sister. So yeah, being out there with my family was awesome, and it was fun to break down the race with them out in Washington. Just got to see my sister, my mom, but then we have some family out there too. So I got to recap the race to a couple of my aunts and uncles who are super interested in how everything went down. And yeah, I feel like every day I sort of remember something new about the race. So it's just fun to sort of talk about it with people because then I remember other aspects of the race that maybe after the race initially, you're kind of just like, what happened? How did I do that? And then over the week, you kind of break it down and remember all the little nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, I'll probably ask you about some of the moves that were made and all that kind of stuff, but I'm curious, what were they most curious about from the race?
I guess just what made me decide to go with the initial moves. Did I know what place I was in throughout the race? And the answer was no, I did not know what place I was in. And yeah, just like how I felt, how did my feeling go? Kind of the basic questions, I guess.
Yeah. All right, well, I'll probably pick at some of the same questions, but I want to go back to just sort of like the training for this one. You know, you and I caught up a couple months back because we were hosting a panel for all of the Project 3 participants, and you were kind of sharing a couple of like your insights into training and how things were going. And if we go back to the beginning of this block, you were dealing with like a hamstring issue. And so take me through sort of like that recovery process and at what point you started feeling good enough in the training block to really give this like a full go.
Yeah, so right after I ran Chicago in the fall, I had a partial tear in my upper hamstring, and it kind of just took me out. Like I wasn't running for about 6 weeks. So I started back running in December, and it was just like very slow progress. I didn't start to feel good until the week leading up to the half marathon championships in March, and had a pretty bad race in Atlanta at the half marathon championships, but it wasn't a surprise either. Like when you only feel good 1 week leading up to the race, it's probably not going to be a recipe for success. But after that race, that was kind of what jump started me feeling good and jump started my fitness and after that things were relatively smooth with training, so it took a long time to get to that point, like December to March of feeling pretty bad, like my hamstring just wasn't fully cooperating. And so after the half marathon championships, I was really able to get in the solid training that I needed to feel confident in my abilities. And I had one more race. I went to the USATF 10-mile championships in DC, and that one was kind of like, all right, let's hopefully we're feeling better than the half marathon championships because that's gonna be a real downer for, my confidence going into Boston if this one doesn't go well. But thankfully, I felt amazing there. Had a really great race. I wasn't far off my PR there. So that was a huge confidence booster going into Boston just 2 weeks later. And at that point, I was just like, all right, let's just go see what I have in the tank. I felt good. I think I didn't feel much pressure just because of how rocky the buildup had been. And yeah, I just had a really good mindset going into Boston this year.
At this point, this is your seventh or eighth, I think, career marathon. And
Yeah, somewhere
what
in
have you
there.
found works in terms of just like the training for you? Like of all these different builds, I'm sure they've all been very different in the variety
Mhm.
of different courses you have to prepare for and the type of race. But what have you noticed that your body tends to like in terms of just like the mileage and the types of workouts, for, 12 to 16 weeks?
Yeah, I'm relatively lower mileage, I would say. I think in this buildup, I got up to 100 miles once or twice, but I kind of hover between that 80 to 100 miles per week. That's kind of my sweet spot right now. I think maybe eventually would move up, but for now, I feel like I respond really well to that. And the workouts too. Like I really enjoy doing faster stuff on the track, doing, mile repeats or 1200s. Those are my favorite workouts, but I definitely probably benefit the most from long runs. And thankfully, my team, we have such a big group, so I feel like they kind of just pull me along. Obviously, Dakota, she just is amazing at long runs. So just trying to hang on for dear life is kind of my motto for long runs. And then it brings my fitness along pretty quickly. Those are not necessarily my most enjoyable workouts, but I feel like I get the most out of them. So definitely need those.
I was just reviewing your results from like the last couple years, and I noticed that in 2024 you competed in the USATF like road mile championships too. So you've always
Yeah.
like kind of had an affinity for the speed side of things.
Yeah, last year after the Olympic trials, I was sort of the mindset of just let's just go do literally every race under the sun and just, see what happens. And yeah, I wanted to sign up for that one. It's so close. It was like not a far drive from Minneapolis at all. So I was like, I might as well just go and ended up PRing in the mile. So that was fun and, got to compete against people I normally would never compete against. So it was a different crowd. But yeah, it's fun to experiment with new things too, different distances, different strategies, all those things.
What was your sign to make the full commitment to the roads? Because as we kind of look at this trend of athletes taking to the roads a bit sooner and not spending as much time in running the 10Ks, like you've been at the marathon since 2021, and then I think it was like 2 years before that, pre-pandemic, you were still running, 5K, 10Ks on the track. But what was your sort of sign to be like, hey, you know what? Like, I want to commit fully to, the marathon and half marathons, and that's where my calling is.
I've always just enjoyed the roads a lot more. Even in college, I would say track wasn't my favorite. I would love cross country way more. Yeah, the roads I just feel way more confident in. Like all my PRs are from the roads. Nothing is from the track. I just don't really have a passion for track, I guess. I love watching it. I love seeing other people compete, but for me personally, I don't have the passion of competing on the track. I don't know why it's so different for me. Maybe one day I'll revisit the track, but for now, I really just have an interest in the roads. And yeah, I feel like if it's where my passion is, that's where I'm going to do well. So my passion is on the roads right now.
I literally just noticed that. So it's like mile PR, 437 from the roads,
Yeah.
versus your mile on the track, 448.
Yeah.
5K on the roads, it's 1531, I think, right? And
I think
then
so. Yeah.
on the track, it was 1605. 10K on the track, 3258. On the roads, 3149. So yeah, across the board.
I think the last time I had a true track season was in college. So it was a while ago. And yeah, maybe one day, but for now I'm happy on the roads.
Compared to the runner you were when you finished 10th at the Olympic trials to this Boston Marathon build, what is the biggest difference, you think?
I think after the Olympic trials, I was able to sort of just let go of a lot of expectations I had for myself. That was my first Olympic trials, and I think I definitely built it up too much in my head, and I think I put too much pressure on myself. I didn't feel external pressure necessarily, but I just put too much stock into that one race, I think. And so I think having a little bit of disappointment at that race really helped me let go of those expectations and then sort of go into my next season just more open-minded. And since then too, like this year, I feel like I'm just more open-minded in races and letting it not putting too much pressure on one, I guess.
I guess so many people have like their what if moments during marathons, but during the Olympic trials, when it was ultimately, I think, more of a test of attrition with so many people
Oh my
just kind
gosh,
of
yeah.
falling off in the last, couple miles. Was there anything else that you could have done, you think, to move up a handful of places? Or was sort of like the team on that day just sort of like a whole nother level ahead? Because, people think top 10, third, but there was a bit of a gap there.
I think seeing how Jess McLean was able to move up, uh, definitely could have moved up had I mean, I was running on empty, so me personally, I don't think I was in a position to do what Jess did that day, but I will say like my mindset was a little bit like, oh, I'm here. Like I can't catch number nine or whatever. I think I just forgot for some reason how long the marathon is and how much can happen even in the last mile. And I think I got a little bit down too early and kind of thought like, this is my position, even though I probably had like 8 to 10 miles left by the time I sort of fell off. There was still so much time to make those moves, but in my mind, it was like it's gone. But that wasn't true. So yeah, definitely a good lesson for any marathon.
How does it change, I guess, when you go from an Olympic trials where mentally you're probably as nervous as you've ever been before any race in that, elite athlete tent beforehand. And then when you finish 10th, you do, have some takeaways from it. You have a whole summer of racing, but then the next one comes up and it's
Hmm.
Chicago.
Hmm.
How different were the nerves or feelings before that race? And then when that goes the way it does, how does it change, I guess, before Boston this year?
Yeah, I wasn't too. I mean, I of course had a little bit of pre-race nerves, but sometimes you just kind of know in the back of your head that a race might not go your way. Like for Chicago, for example, I had had a really good summer of racing, but I had started to at that point, it was probably hamstring tendonitis. And so, like 3 to 4 weeks before Chicago, I think that's sort of when the hamstring first started popping up. But at that point you're like, or I'm like, I have 4 weeks left, my training is going well, we're just going to kind of muscle through it. And but I did kind of have this feeling of I don't think my hamstring is going to feel good, trying to ignore that thought as much as possible. But sure enough, race day I did not feel 100%. And yeah, when you feel off at mile 2, 3 in the marathon, it's so early. Like I just don't you don't want to feel bad at mile 2 or 3. So the signs were there. It wasn't necessarily going to go well. And so I think for me, Chicago, it wasn't necessarily this massive surprise, I guess. So I was able to move on quicker and I just had to focus on healing and recovery after that one. Where this year, Boston, or this spring, I had really started to gain some good momentum ever since the half marathon championships in March. So each week was just getting better. And when you're in that momentum phase, it's every week is just so exciting. Like you look forward to the next workout because you're just curious, like, oh, I did well last week. Let's see how well I can do this week. And it's just fun to see everything come together sort of at the right time. And so that's what Boston was. I was just excited because I knew how much fitness I had gained in the last, month or months. And it was really just go out there and see what I had.
It's funny because it sounds so similar to how Clayton Young essentially also got his groove back and his confidence before Boston. And like the US half marathon championships were a total stinker for him. And he was so disappointed afterwards. And people look at the results on paper, but what they don't see is that window of time between that race and Boston. So can you
Yeah.
describe it, I guess, for us who don't, and because you guys don't have your own YouTube channel that kind of shows that, like Clayton does, what does that look like when you are doing these workouts and you are crushing it and you're gaining this confidence? Is it similar just in a sense to, I mean, when we see Clayton and Connor, like there's a gap between them in workouts, but only you can kind of interpret what that means
Yeah.
for race day. So with you and Dakota, those weeks in between, describe it for us.
Yeah, so leading up to the half championships, Dakota and I, we went to Durham, North Carolina for a month in February to train. And so for me, that month was just all about building mileage, building intensity, and just grinding through not feeling good, basically. So the hamstring wasn't fully cooperating. And then just when I'm in that building phase, I'm just going to be a little bit more fatigued because I'm just building and I'm not necessarily taking down weeks quite yet. So that month was just about grinding, getting through it, trying to, try to close that gap between Dakota and I because Dakota was already very fit going into North Carolina. But then after the half marathon championships, came back home to Minneapolis and uh, thankfully, just I think the race just kind of jump-started things, almost like forced the fitness a little bit, just enough so I could actually have good quality workouts. And so after that one, I was able to do more mileage and more workouts that I just left feeling good about. And it really only takes one good workout for me to kind of get that ball rolling, I would say, leading into the next one. And there was quite a few workouts where I was just like, I don't know if I can do this, but then they would go well, and each one was just a confidence booster for the next one. So yeah, it's crazy how quickly my fitness can come along once I sort of got over that initial hump. But it took a while to get over that initial hump. But once I was past that, it was relatively smooth sailing.
We're nerds for this kind of stuff. What's one of the workouts that really kind of boosted the confidence?
I think the one I was the most scared for and ended up going well was it was 4 by 4 by 3 mile, 2 miles at marathon pace, one at threshold with like 3 minutes jog recovery in between. And I'd never done that one before. And I like most of my workouts when my hamstring wasn't feeling good would start out fast, but then it would gradually get slower just because my hamstring wasn't quite strong enough yet. But at that point, my hamstring was feeling good, and I think I stayed consistent or got progressively faster. And so that one, I was just so nervous for that. Like I was as nervous as a race, I think, for that workout, but it went really well, and that one was probably the biggest confidence booster for the marathon specifically. It's like, oh, if I can get through that one, I can probably race a marathon right now.
Yeah, how did you define marathon pace for this build?
Yeah, it was tricky because uh yeah, I wasn't at my full form quite yet. So I guess basing it more off of goal marathon pace, not maybe where I was currently at. So and just by feel too, honestly. It could be one pace one day and then a different pace the next day.
Was the decision to run Boston with the hamstring like issue a little bit tricky at the beginning, or was it never really much of a question? Because of course, like as Americans, like we tend to fall into the spring marathon trap of it's mostly Boston, and then in the fall it's split between Chicago and New York. People like to the top American marathoners like to stay in the US. It's where the appearance fees are and all that kind of stuff. But was there a level of caution when it came to just sort of like, well, this course might also be challenging for the hamstring?
Yeah, I didn't think about it too much, honestly. I mean, yes, it definitely does play a factor, but I was hoping. my hamstring will just come around in time. It didn't really have any sort of factor in my decision making for which race I was going to run. I was just hoping and praying that it would come around in time.
What's it look like during that kind of like training block where there is just like a stark contrast between you running, 80 to 100 miles a week and then Dakota hitting like 130 sometimes. So it's like,
Crazy.
are you just staying home when it's like, oh, all right, she's out for, there's 8 mile double of the day?
Yeah, when we lived together in North Carolina, I swear she had a double almost every day. And so I would only have like max three doubles a week and mine were shorter. So be like, all right, see ya. And, but yeah, she just thrives off of higher mileage and maybe one day I'll be there, but for now it's just not where I'm at. But it is crazy to just see of how much running and how much time 130 miles takes.
From Instagram, I need to know was it this training trip or before that these nicknames got developed? So there's Baller Banny, which is what Dakota called you, and then you just called her D Dog. Is that what's the story behind those two?
So my boyfriend Drew is, I feel like he's notorious for giving everyone a nickname. And so I think it was him for both of them that started like several years ago, that those started. I'm pretty sure, but maybe it was Dakota that came up with, I couldn't even tell you where they came from, but they've just been thrown back and forth for the last couple years.
Love it. I think more people should start using them when they refer to both of you
It's
from now
actually my birth name. So,
on. Oh, really?
yeah, Baller Banny, it's my birth name.
um, all right, let's get into the actual Boston Marathon and how it all unfolded. You get to Hopkinton, or even just in the days leading up to it, from your Instagram recap, you described it as a lot of uncertainty leading into the race. Morning of, like, how do you quell that and like kind of taper that down, knowing that it's like, all right, it's finally here?
Yeah, thankfully I didn't have too many nerves like once we got to Boston. I think the older I get, the better I am about delaying the nerves until race morning. So I definitely had that sort of nervous energy race morning, but it was more excitement, which that kind of nervous is the best, I would say. And yeah, how as far as how I quelled the nerves, I guess just trying to take each day leading up to Boston one day at a time. And thankfully, I didn't have too many crazy media appearances. I had a couple, but I was able to get some good downtime as well, and got to see family, hang out with my boyfriend Drew. It was pretty low key, so thankfully my nerves weren't too crazy this time.
When you quoted, I guess, what Dakota shared with you, where it all comes together right when it needs to, was
Mhm.
that, in the buildup, pre-race? Like, when did she share that with you?
That was a while ago when I was probably just a little bit down about where my fitness was. I can't remember if she told me in practice or when, but it was a while ago, probably even around half champs or before, sometime in February. And when you hear advice like that in the moment, you're like, you don't understand though. I don't feel good. It's not going to come together at the right time. But then, of course, she was right, and it did come together at the right time. But when I'm in the thick of it, it's hard to imagine it coming together at the right time. So maybe didn't want to hear it at the time, but she was right.
What's your stress coping mechanism in that period? Because like it's also really cool to hear that like you share that with Dakota, who's like, yes, your training partner and teammate, but also one of your toughest competitors come race day, and like it's okay to kind of have that peel back that human side, to another person so that they can help you in the process, especially when they're so accomplished as well.
Yeah, I think both Dakota and I, we've gone through so many ebbs and flows through our career that when, one of us is sort of, not quite hitting our stride, it's easy to give that advice of, oh, remember when you were not fit and then you got fit and, just reminding that other person that things will click eventually. I think that's really helpful when, yeah, like one person is really fit, one person's not really fit. I think we're able to sort of help each other along and remind one another that, it will come along eventually.
So as the race gets going, early on, I guess like it felt like there was nothing really happening in the kind of opening miles, and that's been fairly typical for a lot of these world marathon majors, especially on the women's side where it comes down to the final 5K where the big moves are made, and like the pack, or just even before that when the pack splinters. But what are you telling yourself kind of in those opening miles as it looked fairly crowded around you?
Yeah, the first mile we went out relatively slow, and that was fully what I was expecting. With Boston, I feel like it always goes out pretty tactical. Not always, but a lot of the time. So I was sort of in the mindset of just settle in, this is the time to sort of doze off and to just zone out and maybe daydream about the finish line. But then I think it was even mile two, we started to pick up the pace, and an initial sort of surge in pace was injected by the front group. And I was just gonna go with it at that point. But I was a little surprised. It was I think it was mile two or three. It was pretty early. And I was in the middle of okay, I'm gonna just zone out for a little bit. And then I was like, oh, I guess I'm not gonna zone out for a little bit. I need to focus and try to actually stay with the pack. So the initial move was made, and I think we dropped it down to 5:20 or 5:30. And from there, it just got faster, like 5:10. I think we were even close to a five flat at one point. My watch is probably slightly off, but I remember just feeling good enough to know that it was okay, that I could go with it for a little bit. After a couple really fast miles, I ended up falling off that front pack and sort of was in no man's land. So I just sort of held my own pace for a while. And eventually I actually saw the chase pack of the front group sort of. I noticed either I was getting faster or they were getting slower. We kind of met in the middle, so I was able to reattach to that chase pack eventually. I can't remember which mile that was at. Um, and that was super helpful because being in no man's land for a whole marathon is just brutal. I've done that and it's just not fun. So I was really grateful to reattach to that chase pack and just tried to hang in there with them and stay as consistent as possible until those hills came along.
Yeah, because I think it was like even by 10K, you if people looked around in like the lead pack, you were the only American that was left. Were you surprised by that? Like to look around and say, wait, hold on, where's Kira, where's Emma? Especially you kind of like over the last couple months, like there's just so much buzz about like, all right, like we're gonna try and get an American on the podium and run fast,
Mhm.
and then you look around and you're like, you're the only one.
I was actually surprised. I kind of was just thinking, I'm gonna go with the pace. No, I'm gonna try to just not look at my watch as long as I don't feel like I'm, gassing myself and really digging myself in a hole for later in the race. I'm not gonna focus on the pace, but I guess maybe the other Americans were just a little concerned with the pace that was going out and sustaining it. But I was happy that I went with the move, even though I couldn't sustain that for the full race. I was just happy to be closer to that pack to be able to close it a little easier. I think if I had been a little more conservative, maybe it would have seemed like a more daunting task to try to close that gap. And thankfully, I was able to come off of those pretty fast miles relatively okay. But I was super surprised not to see any other Americans up front. And then, so I I just figured I was up there. And then when Jess Of course, she's just like the best closer in a race ever. When Jess passed me with like a mile or two to go, I was like, "Oh, it's Jess." And then I my thought was how many other Americans are just going to come barreling past me. But it was just Jess, thankfully.
Along the course, I feel like Boston's one of those where it's like if you're an American, like the crowd, you have them in your favor. Like, what was that like? I guess to hear people calling your name along the course and be essentially like a home crowd favorite here.
It was super cool to have so many cheers and yeah, there were the chorus was loud for 99% of it, I would say, which was awesome. And yeah, I feel like there's just so many different waves of excitement. I remember from the first time running Boston that Wellesley College was just insane. And that was very much true for this year as well. I think it's crazy every year. And it's hard not to smile at that part of the course and just get almost emotional with like how loud it is and how excited everyone is to see the racers coming by. Um, so definitely had to try to chill at Wellesley College, but there were several other points in the race too where heard go Frisbee, go Annie, and it just means so much. And I feel like it helps sort of give me that extra boost right when I need it, especially on the hills when people are cheering so loud.
I'm looking at the photo that you posted from Heartbreak Hill. Describe, I guess, like, is that a smile? Is it just like you're in total pain? Like, what's going through your mind there?
I was trying to smile every once in a while. As you know, my teammate Dakota, she always smiles like the whole race. And it does help mentally, I think, remember to smile. I think it's sort of a mind-body trick of, oh, I feel fine, I'm smiling. I did not feel fine, but I was trying to be like, all right, let's just smile for a little bit and see if my body cooperates. It probably looks more like a grimace because I was also in a lot of pain, but I every once in a while I'd be like, all right, let's smile for a little bit and see if it tricks my body.
I'm also, let's go through, I guess, like, so the footwear choice, you went with the Fast R3s. We
Yep.
talked about this on a panel in the days leading up to it, but for the podcast listeners here, I guess, like, can you share sort of like, there was so much buzz around them in the days leading up to it. The study by UMass came out
Mhm.
and you'd been testing them and wearing them in the buildup for this one. What did you really like about the shoes?
I mean, pretty much since the first workout, I was kind of like, oh, these are good. You kind of just know immediately. And then once I had a couple really good workouts in them, especially the long ones are just such a great test for how you'll feel at the end of a marathon. And I felt just as good at the end of a workout in the shoes that I did at the beginning of the workout, which is a great sign for the marathon because as soon as, you know, mile 20 hits and your legs start to break down, you don't want to be thinking about how your shoes feel. And so that was definitely the case for these shoes. And there's so much lighter than the previous Puma shoes and I think other things on the market too. Um, and yeah, I just felt so good throughout the race in them and yeah, just didn't really think about them, which is awesome. No sort of like hot spot on the foot, super bouncy. Yeah, it just overall it feels like such a massive jump in how good the shoes feel. I love the shoes before. I used to race in the Puma Deviate Elite 3s, and those are also amazing. But these I feel like are my new favorites. So I'm very excited about the improvements that were made.
Then I also noticed one arm sleeve, or did you start with two?
I did start with two. I started with two arm sleeves and then gloves because it was kind of chilly, but not crazy. But I took off the gloves pretty quickly and then I wanted to take off my arm sleeves, but my one side I was wearing my watch and sometimes it's just such a pain to try to get an arm sleeve off over the watch, and I didn't want to risk like unstrapping the watch because
Or
it's
lapping it by accident or something like that.
or
Yeah.
yeah, I was like, it's not, I'm not dying of heat, so I'm just gonna keep this one on. But some people commented that I was trying to be like a basketball
Yeah,
star or
that was
something,
my
which I
first
was
thought too
not.
when I saw it.
I was not trying to do that. I was just, I didn't want to risk losing the watch.
So, as you make it through, the hills, I mean, what are you mentally telling yourself when, until kind of Jess and the other pack are behind you, but you're running solo for a lot of it. Like, how are you mentally staying engaged in the race?
Yeah, I was trying to just sort of I talk to myself in my head a lot in races, so I was trying to do that, trying to focus on the back of the person's head that was maybe 20 meters in front of me and trying to reel them in, trying to tell myself to focus on little things like just make sure you have good form. When I get really tired, I start to tilt my head for some reason, so Annie, keep your head straight. And just, yeah, just trying to talk myself through each mile. I think that really helps. And yeah, just trying to remain hopeful when I was sort of in that no man's land because things can change so quickly.
So, one of the things your relatives, I guess, asked you was just sort of you had no idea what place you're in, like so.
Mhm.
Especially because I guess once that lead pack splintered, like there was probably no way of telling. So you had no concept, really.
Not really. I mean, because once the lead pack splintered, I wasn't really paying attention to how many people went with for some, I don't know why. I just wasn't paying attention to that, but I knew it was a big group relatively, but I wasn't counting or anything. And then when that chase pack came back, I was like, oh, well, this is the chase pack. Maybe there's only, two people in that front pack. I just really didn't know. And so at the end, I figured I was in top 10, but I really didn't know where within that.
At any point, did you look down at your watch or see any clock where you knew kind of the pace and like the finishing time that you were projected at? Because coming into this one, of course, like your PR was 2:26 from your debut in 2021, and that had held up.
Mhm.
Did you realize at some point, like, oh, yep, I'm on PR pace?
Yeah, I mean, I the first half for me was the fastest I've ever gone out in a marathon, and I think like the 10K mark was fast. The 15K mark, I was like, oh, that's close to my 15K PR. And then the 10 mile mark came, and I was like, oh, that's not crazy far off of the 10 mile race I did a couple of weeks ago. And then the half marathon came, and I was like, oh, that it was like a 69 something. So that was definitely fast. But, the first half of the course is relatively downhill. So I knew my odds of keeping that pace were probably slim. And so for me, the second half, it was more just about trying to maintain or not, completely go backwards. And so I did have a feeling that not that you want to bank time in a marathon, but I knew that I still felt good when the hills hit at, 16 or 17, that I would probably have a faster time. But anything can happen in the marathon, so you I didn't want to get ahead of myself, but I knew that if I continued to feel as strong as I did, then I would probably have a good time.
Before we get to turning onto Boylston, what's the hardest part of kind of that stretch between Heartbreak Hill and then before the final turn onto the finish line?
Oh, I mean, I know there's three major hills, but I remember from the last time doing Boston that it felt like people had lied to me and that there was like five hills. And I would say it's not all smooth sailing after that final heartbreak hill. There's definitely some little hills in there that at that point in the race affect
They
you. And
sting.
so I was telling myself, Annie, there's 10 hills you have to get through. And so after, three hills, I was like, there's seven more hills you have to get through. So it was a nice surprise if there wasn't actually seven hills. So I was just playing all sorts of mental tricks. And then actually in that section, there was a camera motorcycle that was following me for a little bit. So I was extra focused on, okay, good form, try to catch the person in front of you, all those things. And at one point, when Jess did pass me, I think it was one or two to go, the camera motorcycle stayed on me, and I was starting to get annoyed because I was like, I just want some alone time here. I'm in so much pain. I don't want the camera directly on me. But yeah, I was just trying to pull out all the mental tricks for those last miles. And then once you turn on Boylston, I was hurting at that point, of course, but able to get to the finish line and just hoping that no one was within 2 seconds of me.
Because I guess we didn't get to see much of like the pass by Jess or wherever it was like on the course. Like, was it like I want to try and stick with her, and like, or was it just like a she went and there was no kind of back and forth battle?
She was barreling past me. I don't know if it was just like a move where she was telling herself just to, sprint by me so it didn't seem like I had any hope. But it really felt like, oh, she is going. I'm not like I did try to sort of stick with her for a little bit, but it was clear that she was going, and I didn't have it in my legs anymore to try to make a counter move, I guess. Callie Thackeray was about, 20, 50 meters in front of me. And so I was trying to just gauge off of her for the longest time and try to reel her in. And then once Jess passed, she sort of became that target of, don't let her get further than this or try to reel her in. But I kind of knew with her pace that I wasn't going with, unfortunately.
Compared to the finish line of a Chicago marathon where I mean that was like preservation of just like let's just make it to the finish line with the hamstring intact and survive there. Olympic trials you finish on empty. Boston's a little bit different because yes you're engaged in an actual race, but that final home stretch, like there is part of it that as an elite athlete you can savor in and enjoy because it's the loudest part of the whole entire course for at times. And so how did you enjoy the final stretch even though you're in crazy pain?
I don't know if I did enjoy it much. I mean, I forgot how long that stretch is. Like once you
Yeah,
turn, you can see the finish line, but it's got to be like 600 meters or something.
yeah.
It's long. And so I was in pain. It felt like I was just trying to stay upright because my quads, my hamstrings, my calves, everything started to buckle. And if it was 27 miles, I feel like I would have fallen. Like so it was really just knee drive, stay upright. Of course, the crowds helped carry me there, but I feel like I was just way too focused on staying upright and just getting to the finish line, trying to sort of kick, I guess, but really it was just maintaining and not having anyone else pass me. But I wouldn't say I was like soaking it in because I knew I had to just get to the finish line. It still at that point wasn't over for me.
You're like, Chris, nice try romanticizing Boylston Street, but it was not that.
It was not that for me, at least.
So after you crossed the finish line, it did feel like I guess like a lot the top American women just kind of gathered there waiting for, Des to cross the finish line. You guys all enjoy a moment there. What was sort of I guess like that immediate feeling once, the pain it's starting to settle in probably after crossing the finish line, but there's just a shared camaraderie right there afterwards, with the top American Dakota crosses the finish line, you get to reunite with her, but what was that like?
Yeah, it was so cool to see all of us sort of come across at not the same time, but within a couple of minutes. And yeah, just celebrating with my fellow Americans. So cool. This was such a stacked field on the American side and international, but it's always fun to race against women that I race against all the time and have gotten to know over the years. And yeah, with Des announcing that it would be her last Boston and then to see her do so well was just awesome. And yeah, it was just really special at the finish line. Very emotional. I feel like I always cry at the end of a marathon, good tears or bad tears. And these were good tears. And yeah, it's hard not to get emotional after such a hard effort like that. So much goes into it leading up to it. And then afterwards, the relief that it went so well was awesome.
I guess my final question would be just like, what does this do now? I guess for, your own sort of. I mean, we throw around the word confidence a lot in this one, but that was a key component to making this as successful as it was. But it does feel like the trials in 28, whether or not they happen, wherever they happen, whatever the case for that may be, like it does feel distant.
Hmm.
Um, but it also feels like there's constantly like this turning of the tide when it comes to the U.S. women's marathoning scene, where it's like you can be on top, but come this fall, there might be like two more names that kind of
Oh,
enter
yeah.
the picture when it comes
Hmm.
to things. So, where are you kind of hoping to take this energy and like bottle it up for the next couple years, maybe as soon as like this fall? Because yeah, now I think like there's going to be more attention on you given this performance.
Yeah, I honestly think I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing, sort of. Same mentality. You know, I feel like still, ever since the trials, I'm still not putting too much pressure on one thing. Even if that external pressure is there, I feel like I've gotten better at sort of tuning that out and just trying to focus on the things that I can control. And so I'm just gonna keep sort of chipping away. Don't feel like there's any need to reinvent the wheel and just sort of, keep putting my head down, put in the work, and hopefully that leads to good results.
Yeah, we're like even if you get faster, like and wherever you fall among like the all-time American list, you got to hold on to this Minnesota Distance Elite record now, I guess, right?
I
You've got it.
know. Yeah, I feel like Dakota and I were constantly sort of going back and forth, so we'll have to keep raising that bar.
Awesome. Well, Annie, I appreciate you taking the time to recap this year's Boston Marathon. An incredible performance. We were, in the Puma High Point on Boylston Street, and the people inside were just going crazy for you, just
Uh,
all throughout the race. And so, congrats, and looking forward to what the fall has in store for you.
Thank you. I'm excited as well.